Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, and welcome back to the Be Qur'an podcast. I'm your host, Ali.
And I'm Fatima. It's great to be with you all again for another episode where we explore timeless truths through the lens of the Qur'an.
Today's topic takes us to the heart of a powerful question. Does the design we see in the universe point to a creator?
We'll explore what's known as the teleological argument, the argument of design, and how scholars like Sayed Mohammed Baqer al-Qazwini explain this concept using Qur'anic verses, hadith, and logic.
We'll unpack the law of cause and effect, the idea of infinite regress, and why belief in a first cause, an intelligent creator, isn't just a matter of faith, but a logical necessity.
So if you've ever wondered how to reconcile reason with belief, or how Islamic thought engages with philosophical proofs for God's existence, this episode is for you.
Let's begin. Bismillah.
Today, we're diving into one of the most powerful arguments for the existence of God, the argument of design. Have you ever looked at the order of the universe, the precision in nature, or the structure of life itself, and wondered, could all of this really be a coincidence?
In this episode titled Signs of the Creator, Cause, Effect, and Design, we explore how everything around us, from the galaxies to the cells in our body, points to an intelligent creator. We'll walk through the law of cause and effect, the concept of a first cause, and how the Qur'an and Hadith affirm these truths.
Right. We'll also unpack the philosophical idea of infinite regress and why reason itself demands a starting point, a creator beyond creation. If you've ever struggled to reconcile faith with logic, or wondered how to answer the question, who created God? This episode is for you.
Let's begin. Bismillah.
Today we're looking at, well, a really fundamental question. We've got these sources exploring the argument of design, sometimes called the teleological argument for the existence of a creator.
That's right. We're mainly referencing a lecture by Sayed Mohammed Baqer al-Qazwini, which explores this topic through an Islamic perspective, using evidence from the Qur'an and Hadith.
Right.
But it also ties into these, broader ideas, philosophy, science, like cause.
And effect, probability, that kind of thing.
Exact.
So our mission today, unpack these sources. What are the core arguments and, crucially, how do they connect these ideas to argue for an intelligent creator as presented in this material?
Yeah, let's trace their line of reasoning.
Okay, let's get into it. The basic idea, where they start, it seems pretty direct, just looking around us.
Right. They start with observation. They talk about seeing impeccable design, organization, and these very specific conditions needed for life.
And the conclusion they draw from that.
Observation is that this complexity, this apparent design, suggests, it requires an intelligent creator. They emphasize using the intellect, what they call aql, to see this.
The idea being that life, that creation, it can't just create itself.
That's the core assertion. Order points to an orderer, basically, not just random chance.
Okay, so how do they start building this argument intellectually? The first piece seems to be this law of cause and effect.
Yes, alila wal ma'lu. They present it as a fundamental intellectual law. Our reason tells us everything has a cause. Nothing just pops into existence from nothing.
But then there's the potential problem. What if the change of causes goes back forever? This idea of tesselsol infinite regression.
Right, and the sources argue the mind rejects this. An infinite chain with no beginning? No. It means the effect you see now could never actually happen because it never gets started.
Precisely. They use that analogy of the signatures. Imagine tracing a signature back through judges. If each judge only signed because the one before did, infinitely, and no one ever actually made the first signature.
Exactly. So the signature existing proves there must have been a first judge, a first cause.
That makes the logical bind pretty clear. And they connect this to motion, too.
Yeah, it's a parallel argument. Things move, something must move them. If every movement is just caused by a prior movement back and back forever,
You never get the first push.
right, like the spinning wheel analogy, the old woman has to move it. It needs an outside factor. Even the state before the Big Bang, they argue, needed some external power to kick things off.
So cause and effect demands a first cause for existence, and the reality of motion demands a first mover. These are presented as logical necessities.
That's the foundation they build. Logically, they argue, the universe can't be self-caused or infinitely regressing. It needs an uncaused cause.
Okay, so that's the logical underpinning. Where do they go next? Where do they see the signs of this first cause's work?
They point directly at creation itself. The sources call these signs, often linking them to Qur'anic verses.
Yeah.
Think big. First, the skies, galaxies, solar systems, gravity.
The sheer scale and organization of it all.
Exactly how perfectly organized it all seems. Then they zoom into Earth, how it
Uniquely carries life, the temperature, the atmosphere, the specific gas mix, the plants, the sun's role, all presented as finely tuned.
They also talk about day and night, right? The transition.
Yeah, how smooth and beautiful it is. They reference Surah Al-Furqan, suggesting God designed this smooth transition. And they ask you to imagine, sudden shifts, total chaos.
It's interesting. They even note the smoothness hints at the Earth being spherical.
Right. Weaving in these observations, then there's the example of ships.
Oh, yeah. The huge ships floating while a nail sinks. Density.
Exactly. How does that law work? Did it just happen? Who put that law there? It's framed as evidence against randomness.
Harps and rain. That was quite evocative.
How wind comes down in small drops beautifully. They say, imagine if it all just fell at once.
Disaster, right? So the whole cycle, evaporation, clouds, rainfall, is presented as this designed delivery system for water.
They do acknowledge things like floods, but frame them as having a purpose within the system, not negating the overall design.
Yes, the focus is on the typical functioning system as evidence of design. They also mention, rain bringing life back to the earth, the usefulness of animals, the winds.
And the point isn't that you need a PhD to see this.
Not at all. These are signs for anyone using their aql, their God-given intellect, to just look and think. They're meant to point towards the Creator.
They even use that very specific hadith example, the egg.
Ah, right. Imam as-Sadiq using an egg as proof. He calls it a fortress with no door.
Hard shell, soft membrane, two liquids inside that don't mix. Nothing goes in or out.
Yet, from this closed system, something complex like a peacock emerges. Who designed that? Who manufactured that?
It's a very simple, powerful image for complex design from a sealed unit.
Makes the concept very tangible.
Okay, so we have logical necessity then, observable signs of design. What's the third major pillar of their argument?
This one they call a very powerful version. Hisab al-ihtimalat, the law of probability.
Chance, or rather the improbability of things happening by chance.
Exactly. The core idea is looking at how incredibly unlikely it is for the universe, especially life-supporting conditions, to just randomly arise without any intelligent input.
This is where they start bringing in science and some pretty mind-bending numbers.
Right. They look at our atmosphere first. Its height, shielding us, but especially the composition, 70% nitrogen, 21% oxygen.
Why that specific ratio?
Well, they argue if it were, say, 50% oxygen, highly toxic, everything flammable. If it were only 10%, couldn't breathe. This delicate balance, did it just happen by chance? Highly unlikely, they argue.
And we scale this up to cosmic factors, too.
Oh, yeah. Gravity's precise strength, the Earth's exact distance from the sun, slightly off in either direction. And life as we know it is impossible. It requires incredible precision.
And the Big Bang itself, the numbers there were just wow.
This is a key point for them. the expansion rate. They quote Stephen Hawking. He apparently calculated that if the expansion rate just 1 second after the Big Bang had been smaller by even 1 part in 100,000 million million.
That's 1 followed by 17 zeros.
A whole universe would just collapse back on itself. And if it had been greater by just 1 part in a million, it would have expanded too fast for stars and galaxies to ever form.
That level of fine-tuning is hard to grasp.
It really is. And they use Roger Penrose's analogy to try and illustrate the odds.
The dartboard one?
Yeah, imagine a dartboard the size of the entire universe. Each point is a possible starting condition. Throwing a dart blindfolded, the chance of hitting the exact tiny spot needed for our universe.
Seems incredibly small. How small did they say again?
The number cited from Penrose is 1 in 10 to the power of 10 to the power of 123.
Okay, that's just meaningless, almost. It's so small, right?
They emphasize you couldn't write that number out by putting a 0 on every particle in the universe. It's effectively 0 from a practical standpoint, the chance of this specific outcome happening.
And they add other factors too, like the initial amounts of hydrogen and helium, all had to be just right.
So when you combine all these factors, atmospheric mix, cosmic distances, expansion rate, initial elements, and many, many others, the odds
just keep multiplying against random chance exponentially.
Smaller with every factor. They use the coin flip analogy. Getting heads 10 times in a row is unlikely. Getting it trillions of times in a row, which is the scale they're talking,
About what these universal constants becomes practically impossible by chance.
If that's the conclusion they draw, how can you rationally believe this precise life-permitting universe is just a random accident?
Okay, but they must anticipate objections, right? How do the sources handle common counterarguments? Like from an atheistic viewpoint,
They bring up the lottery analogy. The odds are tiny, but someone wins. So maybe the universe, with enough time, just got lucky.
Makes sense as an objection. How do they counter it?
They say, hold on. A lottery has a system, rules, tickets, a machine designed by intelligent people. Chance operates within that pre-existing design system.
So the system itself didn't arise by chance.
Exactly. So they argue the universe, like the lottery system, needs a designer. Simply having lots of time doesn't explain the origin of the system in which chance operates.
So vast time doesn't solve the problem of needing a system designer in the first place.
According to them, that's their argument. What about apparent disorganization, black holes, dark matter?
Things we don't understand. Right. Couldn't that be evidence against perfect design?
Their response is, those are mysteries. We don't fully understand their function or purpose, so we can't claim they represent disorder just because we don't get them yet. What we can perceive, they argue, looks incredibly orchestrated.
Okay, and then they bring it to this kind of final intellectual choice, the 1%, 99% idea.
Yeah, this feels like a crucial step in their argument. They say, look, even if hypothetically you grant a tiny, tiny possibility, let's call it 1%, just for argument's sake, though they think the real chance is basically 0.
Right. Even if you grant that 1% possibility, the universe could have just happened randomly, what's the alternative?
That a creator exists.
And based on everything else, the logic of cause and effect, the signs of design in nature from galaxies down to an egg, and the final quantitative punch, the staggering improbability of it all happening by chance.
And their conclusion is pretty blunt. To choose the infinitesimal chance, to ignore the overwhelming probability of a creator, they call it the peak of irresponsibility or even stupidity.
Wow, strong words.
They compare it to getting on a plane, has a 99.999% chance of crashing. Why would you take that bet? Rejecting what they see as the clearest reality based on reason and probability is, in their view, dishonoring the intellect God gave you.
So wrapping this up, these sources build the argument systematically, starting with logical necessity, the need for a first cause, then moving to observable signs, the design in nature from galaxies down to an egg. And finally, the quantitative punch, the staggering improbability of it
all happening by chance.
And the whole process is framed as using your aql, your intellect, to follow these pointers. The infinite regress arguments that don't involve a starting point, and the fine-tuning details, citing figures like Hawking and Penrose as using the sources, are meant to make the chance hypothesis seem rationally untenable.
They present it all as compelling evidence pointing towards an intelligent designer arguing that chance just isn't a credible explanation for the universe we observe. Well, we've definitely dug into how these sources construct that argument of design, from first principles to cosmic odds. It leaves you thinking about how we interpret the complexity we see everywhere.
It really does. And maybe here's something to mull over based on this deep dive. If, as these sources insist, using your aql, your intellect, is the key, how do you weigh these arguments when faced with these claims of logical necessity for a first cause and these calculations of probability that seem designed to overwhelm the possibility of chance? Where does your own intellectual assessment land?
What stands out most compellingly or perhaps most questionable to you?